Tiny tales living in my hometown. Wedding bells, they begin easy. Live it down, baby, don't talk that much. Baby knows that baby don't tease me. In the park, we could go walking. Down in the dark, we could go sailing on the sea. Always here, always on time, close call. Was it love or was it just easy? Money talks when people need shoes and socks. Steady boys that think that she needs me. I was just sipping on something sweet. I don't need political process. Got this feeling that they're gonna break down the door. Got this feeling that they're gonna come back for more. See, I was thinking that I lost my mind, but it's been getting to me all this time. And don't stop dragging me down. Silently reflection turns my world to stone. Patiently correction leaves us all alone. And sometimes I'm a traveling, but tonight this engine's failing. And I still hear the children playing. Kick the can, skipping blackjack. Steal a car and ring around Rosie. Rock and roll, Candyland, boogeyman. Run away and give me your sneakers. Acid rain when Babel looked up at Cain. We began weeping and wailing. Hurry hide from pestilence, pills and pride. It's a shame we could have gone sailing, but heaven knows everything. Tranquilize. I got this feeling that they're gonna break down the door. I got this feeling that they're gonna come back for more. See, I was thinking that I lost my mind, but it's been getting to me all this time. And don't stop dragging me down. Silently reflection turns my world to stone. Patiently correction leaves us all alone. And sometimes I'm a traveling, but tonight this engine's failing. And I still hear the children playing deadbeat dances. Come to us and stay.
Okay, hope everybody's doing well. For some reason, my screen capture is not working. Okay, hopefully it'll come back in a minute. Trying to rewrote it. Today we're going to discuss more. I'm going to read more documents. There we go. From newspaper articles from the 1990s about the Council for National Policy. So why don't we begin? This is from the London Observer, 1996. Secret Society of the Righteous. As Republicans begin to gather this weekend at the Convention Center in the spruced-up Gaslight District of San Diego, the real power glinted from across the harbor on the island of Coronado. Half the island, which dominates the bay, is a naval air base, but the other half contains some of the most valuable real estate in the United States and one of its grandest hotels. According to most of the private events that matter to the Republicans are taking place here, away from the hurly-burly and television cameras. The most important meeting of all is entirely closed to any but the members, and the membership list is secret. You will not find the Council for National Policy listed in any telephone book. It is only 15 years old. You do not apply to join. You can only be invited. I am told the membership is around 500. The CNP is the high command of American conservatism, an elite operation devoted to keeping the Ronald Reagan coalition in being. It was founded in 1981 by the small group of Californians and Western multimillionaires who made up Reagan's kitchen cabinet. The Coors Brewing family and Rich DeVos of Amway direct sales giant still provides the financial backbone. The current president of the CNP is Edwin Meese, Reagan's attorney general. The executive board includes the Reverend Pat Robertson, founder of the Christian Coalition, and Phyllis Schlafly, the anti-gay, anti-abortion activist who runs Eagle Forum. It also includes Larry Pratt, who runs Gun Owners of America, from whom we last heard when Bat Buchanan was embarrassed by their attendance at a neo-Nazi rally. Another guest at this weekend's gathering is Oliver North. So Oliver North was still part of the CNP in the mid-1990s after the Iran-Contra affair, which we know that the Iran-Contra affair was a Council for National Policy operation. But still, this is to prove that he wasn't just, they didn't know that Oliver North was, he infiltrated his way in. He was part of the executive committee at this time of the CNP as well. This is long after that. Another guest at this weekend's gathering is Oliver North, the Marine colonel who almost toppled Reagan with the Iran-Contra scandal. And so is Howard Phillips, founder of the United States Taxpayers Party, an organization which does not like taxes at all. I mean, who does? I would hear a lecture by Phillips in his peroration has stayed with me as a reminder that not all fundamentalists are Muslims. Where do laws come from? There are only three possibilities. They can come from our corrupt and wicked government, they can come from our flawed and sinful human selves, or they can come from Almighty God and all the law we need right here in the Holy Bible. That is what the Council for National Policy wants. They are dominionists. They want themselves to physically bring Jesus Christ's kingdom on earth. Sounds very similar to Sabbateanism, doesn't it? It doesn't matter what sins they commit. It doesn't matter what crimes they commit. It doesn't matter what they do. They are elect. The dual doctrine of predestination, the doctrine of election. They are elect. It doesn't matter what they do. It doesn't matter if they run brownstone operations. It doesn't matter if they start wars. It doesn't matter if they gun run. It doesn't matter if they kid run or child trafficking or elite pedophilia. None of that matters because they're elected by God. Now, anybody out there who's sitting there saying, well, I'm a Christian conservative and I believe in Trump and I believe in the Council for National Policy. And, well, I mean, doesn't that kind of sound like the elite, the liberal elite, too, that everybody vilifies? Not saying that they are not guilty either. My God, they are. I mean, Hillary Clinton, Huma Abedin, Anthony Weiner, Ed Buck, George Soros. I mean, the list goes on, okay? But I'm just saying is you can't have those double standards, people. You can't be like, well, I'm going to not look at the CNP because they claim they stand for Christian values. Well, no, they don't actually. They claim they stand for Judeo-Christian values, which is different. And they're anti-abortion, and they're pro-gun control, and all the things that I'm for. I mean, not pro-gun control. I'm sorry, pro-guns, pro-Second Amendment rights, pro-First Amendment, all the stuff that I am for. As a conservative myself, or at least I have conservative beliefs, I'm for those things. But the CNP is not that. Okay, and that's what you're going to have to learn. You're going to have to learn that, that the CNP runs, and Jimmy G and I did an excellent show on Into the Microcosm the other night. They control a majority of the alternative media, and so does John Birch Society before them. So that's why Alex Jones is not talking about the Council for National Policy, and only talking about the Council on Foreign Relations and the Bilderberg, because he can't. He would expose himself. He would expose himself as a fraud. Now, Bill Cooper hinted at the CNP a lot when he talked about Wells Carto and the Liberty Lobby, when he talked about, who was the Mormon's name? Bobo Gritz. But he never mentioned the CNP by name. So that's where we're at. My goal, I guess, through all these videos to awaken people about the CNP is to tell you that they're all fucks, okay? Left, right paradigm don't matter, all right? Conservatives are no better than the Democrats, all right? Liberals are no better than conservatives. Now, I know you're sitting here saying, well, if you're a liberal, well, how can that be? Or if you're a conservative, because somehow we all got pulled back into the left-right paradigm with Trump. Oh, John, how can you be? Those liberals are pedophiles and they want climate, they're for climate change laws and they want to tax us and do all these horrible things. Well, I mean, the Council for National Policy was up to a lot of horrible things, too, that we can't just sleep under the rug just because the CNP agrees more with some, we agree with some more of the CNP's values when it comes to our political leanings. So the CNP's been involved in Iran-Contra affair, Franklin scandal, 9/11, the Middle East wars. I mean, you can't just sweep that under the rug because you're a conservative and they quote unquote stand for conservative values. You can't just do that. All right, and I know a lot of people are going to downvote me. Trump's our guy, John, and you're not a conservative. That's bullcrap, people. Get out of that mindset. They have put you in this mindset. I cannot stress that enough. These folks stick together. They do not trust the mainstream media to cover the convention in the right kind of way. So DeVos gave his CNP chum Robertson $1.3 million to underwrite a special telecast at the convention on the Televangelist Family Channel. If that contains too much religion, good conservatives could switch to National Empowerment TV on cable, founded by another CNP stalwart, Richard Weyrich, who made his first fortune through direct-to-mail fundraising for conservative causes. The Council for National Policy loves the mainstream media, but does not really trust the Republican Party either. It was quite prepared last week to humiliate Bob Dole in his insistence that there will be no tolerance caused on abortion in the party manifesto. The CNP's conservatism is striking in the casual approach to economic policy. Karl Marx would hardly believe it that such a deeply ideological organization could be quite so agnostic about something as fundamental as free trade. The CNP quite happily embraces the Buchanan argument that free trade is too damn good for foreigners and too challenging for unprotected American workers. But CNP newsletters have supported the North American Free Trade Agreement and other landmarks of new free trading system. That's that doublespeak. You listening out there? People still believe in a left-right paradigm, still believe Trump's our guy, still believe conservatism. That there's a good senator or a good member of the House up there in Sodom and Gomorrah, the swamp also known as D.C. Yeah, on paper, the CNP runs around and they're like, oh, NAFTA's a bad thing. Free trade's a bad thing. Oh, it's so bad. It's so bad. And look, I do believe NAFTA's bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm more of a fair trade guy. I believe that we should abolish the income tax and go to tariffs. But that being said, though, they might run around and say that, but in secret in their meetings and stuff like that and in pushing literature, they're pushing NAFTA. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. This is this doublespeak that so many people fail to look at and check themselves and use their spirit of discernment that God gave them to realize these people are vipers. Sickening to me. CNP core convictions are far more about social behavior and about politics in the traditional sense. They distrust Washington and loathe big government and taxes and extensively oppose any attempt to suggest that there may be a public right to interfere with private property, but are quite prepared to use the law and government to control private behavior. They insist the government should never have the right to stop me developing in my property as I wish, even if it's on fragile wetlands. But the government must have the power to imprison any doctor who dare carry out an abortion. Theirs is a deeply confused conservatism. As heritage runs back through Reagan, the first conservative standard-bearer in the post-war period, the Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater. His pledge that I'd rather be right than president is still the battle cry of conservatism that prefers righteousness to power. But Goldwater is shunned now by the CNP because he abides by the old libertarian tradition of the American right. Always has been gays in the military and always will be. Hell, I don't care if they're not straight, so long as they can shoot straight, he declared 3 years ago when he came to the rescue of Clinton's controversial policy. Other solid conservatives are appalled by some of the more striking victories the CNP managed to achieve in the conquest of the Republican Manifesto. William Bennett, the former education secretary whose best-selling book, Book of Virtues, is the party's new cultural Bible, declared himself physically sickened by the new immigration policy, which he says the right of birth should no longer apply in American citizenship. Children of illegal immigrants born in the United States would no longer qualify as Americans. I agree with that. But confused sectarian or narrow-minded as they are, this is a group with the wealth and the media outlets and the Christian coalition. They have a nationwide organization to dominate the Republican Party. We're not big enough as a movement for the Republican Party to win with us alone, Christian Coalition Director Ralph Reed explained in San Diego yesterday. We are big enough so they cannot win without us. Though the CNP, the Christian Coalition, has just the allies it needs in a broader, more secularism reaches of conservatism, but there is now an open question of whether the traditional Republican coalition can survive this intolerant new power of this Council for National Policy. It's not only these liberal Republicans who support abortion who fear being driven out by the gay Republicans, those who support gun control, those who question the need for prayer in schools, and those who think the Republicans should protect the environment. I do think the Republicans should protect the environment. I mean, I'm not protect the government. I do believe that I do believe government serves a function, and I do think it's greatly overstepped those roles. But I'm not an anarchist or a minimalist either, a minarchist either. So I do believe that there should be regulations when done right. Now, will a government ever be done quote unquote right? I don't know. I mean, not to the second coming of Christ, but let's be real here. But just in fantasy land, I do think that the government should have, there should be an EPA, and it should spend its time trying to reduce pollution by both the government and corporations, not so much by citizens, but as far as doing that, I agree with. But they don't do that at all. It's corrupt as hell. It's only the liberal Republicans who support abortion. Okay. In asserting their dominance over the party in San Diego, the Council for National Policy and Christian Coalition are forgetting the key to the success of their hero, Reagan. Political parties win by widening their coalitions to bring people in, not by keeping them out of elite and secretive island conclave. Okay. From the Indianapolis Star, April 25th. Actually, I don't want to read them in out of order. Okay. Now, there's a website that I'm going to start reading articles from a researcher named Skip Portis. He wasn't really a researcher. He was a journalist. He was both, but he was more of a journalist. I'm going to start reading articles from his website about the Council for National Policy for the next couple of episodes, maybe more than that. So, since its inception with little more than a decade ago as a newsletter, Freedom Rider has grown from the original 4-page format to a monthly publication which now carries the title Freedom Rider Magazine. The current combined January-February issue of the Great Barrington Pace publication, publisher Skip Portis, reveals a confidential extreme right memo which sheds a good deal of light on what is really behind the balanced budget controversy. And we're going to read that on this site when we get to it. The memo Portis was able to obtain was sent on September 19, 1995 to the members of the Council for National Policy, the umbrella organization of the hard right. Edwin Meese, who served as Attorney General under Ronald Reagan, is now its president. A former president is Pat Robertson. The memo sent to members for your eyes only consists of the interview, which what it refers to as one of the conservative stars in the new Congress, Congressman Mark Sawyer, an Indiana Republican, is one of the signers of the contract with America. He is quoted as telling the Council for National Policy interviewer, "We'll let the government shut down. This is our maximum point of leverage to insist that parts of the revolution are executed." When asked what happened if the government was forced to shut down, he really replied, "We don't know or really care." As a spokesperson for the freshmen New Rebels in Congress, Sawyer left out doubt where they would oppose any compromise that House Speaker Newt Gingrich would be willing to accept if the compromise did not include the specific demands supported by the hard right. Those demands were listed in the action alert sent out by members of the Christian Coalition, whose leaders are members of the Council for National Policy. What they did expect to accomplish by the threat of shutting down the government covers a lot of ground. Specifics include no funding for abortion for any reason, prohibition of unmarried couples adopting children. I kind of agree with those. Couples education vouchers. I don't agree with vouchers. A sizable reduction in the National Endowment of Arts. Okay. Elimination of the Office of Surgeon General. Okay. Portis concludes that the time will tell how the Council for National Policy and its Christian Coalition members will affect the final form of the federal budget. From the LA Weekly, July 4th, 1997, Death of an Ideologue. The New Right Rose on Salvatore's Money by Jim Crogan. When oil man and industrialist Henry Salvatore died this month at the age of 96, he was lauded as a philanthropic giant, a man who contributed generously to cultural arts centers, adoption groups, hospitals, and schools such as the University of Southern California, Stanford, Pepperdine, and Howard University. But the interest and influence of Salvatore, an unrepentant cold warrior, also cleaved another way, hard right. A confidant of Republican Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Reagan, who often had these men look like moderates, Salvatore was a fixture inside the country's reactionary power circles, particularly the political backrooms of Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. Since the end of World War II, Salvatore functioned as a leading right among coterie of wealthy ideologues who become the philosophical and financial godfathers to America's post-Vietnam New Right, making their anti-union, conservative Christian policies both fashionable and a force to be reckoned with. As a political power broker, he helped push Ronald Reagan to the White House, raised funds for the CIA-backed Contras, advocated for the quarantining of AIDS patients, and in the final years stridently opposed multicultural education. It would be hard to overestimate the importance of Salvatore and his money to growth of the far right, says Detroit investigative reporter and author Russ Ballant. Remember, I read Russ Balance part of the Coors connection is one of the, I think it's the second or third video I did on the CNP. And his, go back and watch that video. He does a very good overview of the CNP back then. I mean, very well written for the time in the early 90s that he wrote the book. Even though Russ is definitely extremely left-leaning. But most of the information reports in there is correct. He notes that the Salvatore had for generations provided much of the financial muscle behind conservative think tanks such as the Heritage Foundation, the super secretive Council for National Policy, and the notorious political action groups such as the American Security Council. These groups not only help make conspiracy-based belief systems, like the John Birchers, fashionable, they helped redefine the nature of conservatism among today's new right thinkers, Ballant says. This soldier of the right began his political life as an avowed socialist who grew disillusioned over the tyrannies and economic failures of Stalinism, says Professor Charles Kressler, director of Salvatore Center, a political science school at Claremont McKenna College. After his flirtation with the left, this Italian immigrant went about the business of being supreme American capitalist. His early career included parlaying an engineering degree into a job at Bell Laboratories. He later quit Bell to work for John Karcher, a pioneer of modern oil exploration who founded Texas Instruments. In 1933, Salvatore scraped and borrowed to start his own oil exploration company, Western Geophysical. Eventually, Western Geo became a leader in oil exploration, and Salvatore hit the jackpot by selling the multi-billion-dollar business to Litton Industries in 1960. With his own fortune secure, Salvatore devoted much of his energy to becoming a financial capo for the right, and much of his activity was in concert with the American Security Council. Starting in Chicago by 1955 and staffed by former FBI agents, the organization, which is now a right-wing think tank based in Washington, D.C., was ideologically anti-communist and anti-union. Its operatives transverse their shadowy borderline separation corporate espionage from government infiltration campaigns. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to Recluse's ViseUpView.com blog on the American Security Council if you guys want to further learn about that and its connections to the John Birch Society and the Council for National Policy. According to author Ballant, the organization created dossiers on alleged communists and left-wing groups by creating a system modeled after the FBI. Its files included those obtained from the House Un-American Activities Committee, individuals such as Harry Young, who was a major distributor of anti-Semitic tract titles The Protocols of Learned Elders of Zion. Young's files alone reported 1 million names in the index. The ASC also focused heavily on anti-labor intelligence gathering, which made it available to corporations that include Standard Oil, Rockefellers. Rockefellers do have connections to the right. CNP, John Birch Society, Honeywell, Sears, United Fruit, United Fruit. Now Chiquita and United Steel, or U.S. Steel, should I say. His landmark book, The Age of Surveillance, author Frank J. Donner reports that the American Security Council formed a working alliance with former Santa Clara Deputy Sheriff Jerome DeConte, a devotee of the ultra-conservative John Birch Society. DeConte covert operation included break-ins at the United Farm Workers and a dirty tricks campaign against Cesar Chavez, who was trying to organize migrant laborers. But the activities of Salvatore's support organizations were not entirely covert. Salvatore and members of the circle also pursued a Hearts and Minds campaign, funding a select group of politicians to carry their message forward. Salvatore's interest into political politics was a California fundraising organization for the 1964 presidential campaign of Arizona conservative Barry Goldwater. It was during this ill-fated effort that ex-actor Ronald Reagan first caught Salvatore's eye. Salvatore was among the corporate barons who approached Reagan to run for governor of California, offering him political and financial support. Eventually, this group spearheaded Reagan's successful run for the White House. They became known as Reagan's Kitchen Cabinet. It wielded wide influence, particularly in the area of high-level appointments. The inner circle include Patrick Frawley, heir to the Schick razor fortune, and founder of Schick Treatment Centers. Okay. That's interesting. So you're telling me, hold on, there's no way. You're telling me the guy who made Schick razors, okay? He got connections to the Council for National Policy. Wow, really? He ends up making a substance abuse center You listening, Matthew North? You listening? You listening here? You listening, young Matthew? This might connect to maps. This might connect to... Ask yourself, you conservatives out there, why are psychedelics pushed in years that the Council for National Policy is in control? Reagan, Bush, Trump. Look into the MAPS Institute. Matthew North's done excellent videos on the MAPS Institute. Joe Rogan, them all pushing psychedelics. Look into it. There's probably another thread to that. Justin Dart, head of Dart Industries, mega car dealer Holmes Tuttle, and Alfred Bloomingdale, the department store magnate. Dart, Tuttle, Bloomingdale have all died in recent years. Even during the highly public period, Salvatore remained in the vanguard of covert right wing. After Congress cut out military aid to the Contras, the American Security Council, the same anti-communist group that had formed in 1955, turned to Salvatore and other captains of industry for help. In 1987, Salvatore provided unspecified but probably substantial accounts to the Contras via fundraiser Carl Spitz Chanel through one of Chanel's tax-exempt organizations, the National Endowment for the Preservation of Liberty. The American Security Council reached its zenith in Washington during the Reagan administration. By then, its tentacles reached into the executive branch and numerous congressional offices. It also organized forums and information-sharing meetings between intelligence agencies and America's leading corporations. Thus, these conservatives, many of whom railed about left-wing conspiracies, infiltrated official Washington more completely than the radical left ever did. That's not true. That's not true. That's liberal propaganda. It shifts sides. That's not true. The left has been... Okay, well, again, it's all compartmentalized, and it all goes up to the top. In the top step, you have the elite. And then from there, you have these, ideological divisions. And sometimes there's fights, and sometimes they're not. Between the left and the right, between the communists and the fascists, between the CNP and the CFR, the Hegelian dialectic problem reaction solution that's needed between the two to ebb and flow to give people like you and I things to research for the rest of our lives, and for the sheep to get over pointless arguments in infinitum about social justice or conservatism. But the radical left had power, okay? I'm sorry. Especially when Obama was in. The CFR has power sometimes. It's like CNP has power sometimes. Ultimately, they're lockstep together at the top. There's a little bit of spin on this article that I got to disprove there. To date, there's never been a full accounting of just how many private intelligence files were compiled by groups such as the ASC, or been widespread their dissemination has been. Salvatore was also a force in local politics, serving in 1969 as a campaign manager for incumbent Los Angeles Mayor Sam Yorty against Tom Bradley. Salvatore was heavily criticized for strategies that include commercials alleging that Bradley was recruiting support from the Black Panthers. Years later, in 1988, Salvatore donated $10,000 to Proposition 96, an anti-AIDS initiative that called for the quarantining of AIDS victims. Throughout the years, Salvatore's ties to Reagan's remained strong. After his Republican spear carrier left office, it was Salvatore and an unnamed group of friends who arranged to leave Reagan's their current Bel Air home on St. Cloud Road. Salvatore maintained an office in Century City until 3 months before his death, continuing to manage the business and philanthropic interests. The University of Southern California in particular has benefited from his gift-giving. In 1961, Salvatore and his late wife, Grace, gave USC $325,000 to start a research institute on communist strategy and propaganda in the College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences. They followed up with an additional $500,000 in 1965. The Salvatores, who have 2 campus buildings named after them, also donated $2 million to the school's building fund and $250,000 to the USC-affiliated Children's Hospital. In 1990, Salvatore started his own foundation, to which he contributed an estimated $8 to $9 million for education-related projects. In the end, education became Salvatore's burning passion. His goal over the last decade was to really influence the next generation of students and teachers towards political conservatism, notes Claremont professor Kressler. In particular, he believed that multiculturalism in the education system is one of our pressing and divisive problems. He saw it as a doorway leading us down to the same path to ruin as Rome. Interesting. because that's what the Knights of Malta and the Jesuits, which are a strong faction within the Council for National Policy, is what they want. Jay said Jan did. Yeah, he did, but Jan's controlled opposition, in my opinion. He's definitely thrown his lot in with the Council for National Policy, especially here as of late, also with his conversion to Mormonism. So, yeah, Jan did do some work, but again, I would, look at that more with a fine-tuned comb than I would look into the work that Matthew North has done in the maps. And, yeah, Matthew, I got some questions with him, working with Renegade Media and Black Sun and all that, which I am not a fan of Nazi occultism. But Matthew does do good work, and when he does do good work, I will say he does good work. Jan, on the other hand, I don't trust Jan as far as I could throw a brick. Yeah. Suicidal Porn Star in the chat said Thomas Fitton of Judicial Watch is a CNP Gold Circle member. Yes, he is. Judicial Watch will they're going to get Hillary Clinton any second, you guys. Any second. Any second Hillary Clinton's going to go to Guantanamo Bay. Jimmy and I talked about that last night. I'll be putting up that show sometime next week while I'm on vacation for Thanksgiving. It'll be premiere sometime, the show that we did talking about Alex Jones and Roger Stone. Okay, let's continue. From the Indianapolis Star, April 25th, 1998. North visits to endorse GOP House candidate. Most people know Oliver North because of his role in the Iran-Contra affair and his testimony about it before Congress in 1987. But Gary Hofmeister knew North even before that. I knew Ollie before it was cool, Hofmeister, Republican candidate for Congress, said when he introduced North on Friday at a campaign rally. It's probably something you shouldn't say. Hofmeister became friendly with North when both were attending meetings at the Council for National Policy, a conservative group that met several times a year. So North's visit to Indianapolis to endorse Hofmeister was not political, North said before the rally. It's personal, he said. I admire and respect him. He's the kind of person I like to see in public office. I'm not going to read all that. I just wanted to get that out there. Again, as late as 1998, Oliver North was messing with the Council for National Policy. So, I guess it continues. All right, let's see how long this article is. Whew, that's a long article. Okay. This will be the last thing that we do for today. Last article that I read. I'm going to be doing, hopefully, a presentation this week that I did at the Shoot the Moon conference at NYC on the Council for National Policy with a friend of mine who's going to read it. That'll be some evening this week. Hope you guys enjoy it. It'll be on the John Birch Society and the CNP. So let us begin. The New Republic, the Robespierre of the right. Now, who was Robespierre? Was Robespierre the fomenter of the radicalism during the French Revolution that led to the execution of my ancestor, Brisson, who fought in the Revolutionary War? Guy de Brisson? Yeah. I hate the Jacobins with a passion. But let's go ahead and read this. On August 10, 1996, just one day before the Republican National Convention, several hundred of the country's most conservative activists and donors met secretly at the resort on Southern California Coronado Island. It was the same spot where nearly 4 decades earlier Marilyn Monroe had filmed Some Like It Hot. A coincidence probably lost on this crowd. Members of the Council for National Policy were a fleeting temptation. One of the peers of the movement had gathered at Coronado, men like Oliver North, Pat Robertson, and Larry Pratt, and the press had recently drummed into exile for his alleged ties to white supremacists. In the past, the group's clandestine revival meetings had spawned liberal warnings of a vast right-wing conspiracy. But this morning, the council would plot against its own internal enemies, GOP apostates, and the chief conspirator was Paul Weyrich, the man who founded the Heritage Foundation, orchestrated the party's alliance with evangelical Christians, and more than any other figure, organized the right inside the Beltway. I will tell you this is a bitter turn for me, Weyrich confessed. I've spent 30 years of my life working in Washington, working on the premise that if we simply got our people in leadership that it would make a difference. And yet, we're getting the same policies from them that we got from their Rockefeller Republican predecessors. Yeah, Weyrich, you know that. You know it's all the same. You're up there. You're high enough to know it's all the same. Don't bullcrap people that are reading this. Again, it doesn't matter who's the president. It doesn't matter. They've all continued the agenda of the world order. All of them. Even John Fitzgerald Kennedy. It was a time, Weyrich concluded, to contemplate the one once unconscionable. Another revolution, this time against, quote-unquote, our people. What's happening today? What's happening? Alex Jones calling for FEMA camps that he once decried, saying we have to put the liberals in there and they might have to be re-educated for a short period of time. Michael Savage last week on Friday said the same thing. CNP, Council for National Policy, Jewish Zionist Michael Weiner said the same thing on his show, the Michael Savage Show. That people that go crazy on Twitter and your liberal family members because they're so unhinged with Trump derangement syndrome, they might have to go to re-education camps. Yes, the irony of someone who is Jewish telling a person they're going to have to go to a concentration camp is hilarious, in my opinion. The irony is so thick. You can cut it with a chainsaw. But whatever. Neither the New York Times nor the Washington Post covered or even noticed the meeting. But within weeks, the internal purges had begun. Even Newt Gingrich, the man who brought Republicans to power, was no longer safe from attacks on the right. The fight resembled that of the old left. The Leninists killing Stalinists, killing Maoists, or in this case, the Freemanites killing the Buckyites, killing the Burkeans. What Weyrich was proposing was something new in American politics, a Republican Politburo. He was using tottering conservative TV network National Empowerment Television, which he dubbed the means of communication, to denounce party members who compromise on even the most obscure GOP commandments. He accused Senate Judiciary Chairman Orrin Hatch, a man he had once touted for president, of having psychological problems. After Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott, CNP member, supported the Chemical Weapons Treaty, Weyrich released an open letter to the public declaring, "I can't have friends who sell out their country." Yeah, Jay Corden on the chat. Adam Green has controlled opposition, like suicidal porn star said there. Yeah, I mean, come on, you guys. I mean, all he does, he never talks about, or he rarely talks about the CNP unless he has someone on there who's talking about. He downplays Jesuits and the Knights of Malta role within the world order. Doesn't dare mention the Mountain Jews. Scientology is primarily only the Juden. So yes, usually that is a red flag. And of course, I'm not saying that the Zionists and don't have a very, 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 very strong power structure within the world order. They do. But when a person sticks to one thing and only harps on that and also gets facts wrong, like claiming that Donald Trump is a Jew because of one of his books, I don't remember exactly which one. There's a chapter there written by David Geffen. It talks about him being a Jew in Trump's book. And so Adam Green's like, yeah, this is proof that Trump's a Jew. Well, if you actually read the beginning of the chapter, there, Adam, you would know that was David Geffen who wrote that chapter, not Trump. So yeah, let's continue. I'm not a fan of Adam Green. I think he's controlled opposition by the Regnery part of the Council for National Policy. I don't know about Matthew. I have questions about Matthew in that regard. I'd like Matthew to talk to me about them one day. But I doubt he will. I will say this. Just like choosing Fuentes over Kirk, it's a bitter pill. I definitely would choose the work of Matthew North over Adam Green. If Weyrich were the only conservative purging Republicans, he'd be no more than an interesting character, a minor albeit compelling player in the history of the conservative movement. Yet he has become in many respects a case study for the conservative mind, a metaphor for the right's deep-seated inability to accept the compromising nature of power. Since January, conservatives have orchestrated a coup against Gingrich, sabotaged William Weld's nomination as ambassador to Mexico. Remember, William Weld was a part of the Octopus, Danny Castellero's work, the Inslaw scandal. He gave the promised software to Gobinafer, transferred it to Gobinafer, or allowed its transfer, I guess I should say, to Gobinafer and Khashoggi. And watched some of his most faithful, including Ronald Reagan's son, defect from the party. The Conservative Weekly Standard, which proclaimed a quote-unquote permanent offense in its September 1995 debut, now frets, is there a worldwide conservative crack-up, which had taken the left nearly a century. The right has managed in less than 3 years self-immolation. To most of the outside world, of course, this is a movement of conservative conquest. In the last 3 years, Republicans have reformed welfare, cut taxes, balanced the budget, passed a line item veto, and banned gay marriage, all despite a razor-thin majority in Congress and a Democrat in the White House. These are not piecemeal compromises. They are major legislative triumphs, all but unthinkable just 4 years ago. The trouble is that after 30 years of attacking the government from the outside, the right cannot seem to maintain its stability on the inside. The habits of suspicion, pessimism, and antagonism run too deep. And nowhere do they run deeper in Paul Weyrich, a man trying his hardest to destroy the very Republican establishment he spent his whole life building. Again, who does that remind you of? Trump going to drain the swamp? Trump, who's been a crook his whole life, decided to become a white hat one day and save this country because he listened to John Birch Society? Alex Jones, as Alex Jones claims. You got to fill the swamp to drain the swamp, I guess. But I continue. When Weyrich arrived in Washington, D.C. in 1967, with a bright pink sport coat and buried gold-water glasses, there were only a handful of conservative institutions. The politics of the radical right was still, as Daniel Bell had noted a decade earlier, the politics of frustration. The sour impotence of those who find themselves unable to understand, let alone command, the complex mass society that is politely today. Inside the Capitol, where the 24-year-old Weyrich worked as press secretary to Colorado Senator Gordon Allott. He was a minority within a minority, a right-winger among Rockefeller Republicans outside the Capitol. He was heckled by anti-Vietnam demonstrators as he entered the building. "How can you judge me?" he once screamed back. "You don't even know me." But the taunts continued. For conservatives recalls William F. Buckley, founder of National Review. William F. Buckley, CFR member. Spook. Bilderberg. Skull and Bones. Buckley's a scum as they come. Washington was an utter hospitable place. Yet even then, the city tempted Weyrich. All of a sudden, lobbyists were telling me how smart and wonderful I was. He told me during one of these several interviews over the last 3 months. No one had ever been very nice to me before. Back home, they didn't cross the street before they talked to me. You see how his hero had resisted similar reductions. Weyrich reread Whittaker Chambers' witness and prayed for strength. Then one day in 1969, after sneaking into a liberal coalition meeting, he had an epiphany. Before him and a dozen congressional aides, a think tank policy wonk, and a cadre of Democratic interest groups, all coordinated sympathetic op-eds, studies, and demonstrations in efforts to push through a housing bill. Suddenly, Weyrich understood not only his enemy but his life calling, to replace the liberal establishment with a conservative one that would guide the movement, at least out of the wilderness. With the help of the Burkean nerd named George F. Will and a former University Mississippi cheerleader named Trent Lott, CNP member, Weyrich soon founded his first cloister of true believers, the Conservative Lunch Club of Capitol Hill. While his colleagues sold out over price and wage controls, in 1973, Weyrich and his growing band unleashed the House Republican Study Committee and its center counterpart, the Steering Committee. With his hair greased back a la Joe McCarthy, he warned his enemies, "We are different from previous generations of conservatives. We are no longer working to preserve the status quo. We are radicals working to overturn the present power structure of the country." If anything embodied the power structure, it was the Brookings Institution, a liberal think tank that for decades had stoked the New Deal with ideas. In 1970, Nixon's speechwriter Patrick J. Buchanan, CNP member, sent a memo to the president pleading for a conservative counterpoint to Brookings. 3 years later, Weyrich answered his plea with a $250,000 gift from Joseph Kerr, CNP member of the Brewing Empire. Weyrich and his friend L. Fulner, CNP member, founded the Heritage Foundation. In a short stint as president, Weyrich was given the storming around the office, his normally pale skin blood red, his pants pulled up high above his belly, lecturing those around him on how to be a good conservative. As the fledgling think tank became more influential, and inevitably blurring with the establishment, Weyrich grew increasingly uncomfortable with his creation. Less than a year after many conservatives' great accomplishment, he resigned to establish the Free Congress Foundation and its Political Action Committee, the Committee for Survival of a Free Congress. Together they served as a 24-hour right-wing fueling station, funding candidates, churning out newsletters, and holding conferences. It may not be with bullets, he told Richard Vergary, the right kingpin of direct mail, CNP member also, but it's also war, Netherlands. It's a war of ideology, it's a war of ideas, it's a war about our way of life. Soon there were more enemies: hippies, aristocrats, communists, Washington Doyenese, Ralph Nader, Vatican II, the IRS, the Warren Court, the Women's Movement, Ted Kennedy, Harvard University, New York Times. And there are traitors too: Nixon, Kissinger, Rockefeller. Even Buckley was suspect. A college dropout whose father tended a boiler at night. Weyrich sneered at the FET, erudite godfather of conservatism. By 1978, Weyrich's PAC helped sweep into Congress a new radical breed of populist conservatives. The most notable, it turned out, was a brash young man from Georgia named Newt Gingrich, who Weyrich had trained for earlier at this campaign seminar in Milwaukee. Newt Gingrich is also CNP. Finally, on the verge of realizing his right-wing utopia, Weyrich harvests what his friend, current CNP member as well, Morton Blackwell, termed the great tract of virgin timber of the political landscape evangelicals. Out there is one might call a moral majority, he told CNP member Jerry Falwell in Lynchburg, Pennsylvania in 1979. That's it, Falwell exclaimed. That's the name of the organization. Weyrich, who converted from Roman Catholicism to the Eastern Orthodox. Weyrich was an Eastern Orthodox. Church at the Vatican II did more to coin the name. With a handful of activists, he engineered the alliance between the Republican Party and the growing number of evangelicals angry over abortion rights and federal intrusion in parochial schools. Less than a year later, Ronald Reagan walked into the White House. By 1981, while his friends were still backing their newfound power, Weyrich began to experience sudden bouts of pessimism and paranoia, early symptoms of the nervous breakdown that afflicts conservatives today. 1 hour, Weyrich would enter the Republican White House to strategize. The next, he would flee outside to condemn its policies. All around him, he complained to the editors of the Heritage Foundation's policy review. His friends have gotten high-paid jobs and expensive mortgages and began to be part of the problem. Hoping desperately to stay on the outskirts, Weyrich started weekly conservative luncheons to keep pressure on the administration. Yet already there were signs of compromise. Even Reagan seemed seduced, flirting with Mikhail Gorbachev. Oops. And inflating the deficit. In 1984, a despondent Weyrich met with Vergary to consider creating a third party. We're sick of electing candidates for the GOP and then being left out of the cold, used and abused and lied to, Vergary told the press. Interesting. They didn't talk about Richard Vergary and Tim LaHaye and Koch and Nelson Bunker Huntford in the CNP in 1981. I thought this article would have talked about that. Interesting. By the 1988 presidential campaign, Weyrich was even more disillusioned. When the Bush camp refused to meet with a group of Afghani resistance fighters, Weyrich conspired to hide them in an adjoining room when Dan Quayle turned up at luncheon, hosted by the Free Congress Foundation. The plan was to sprung them on an unsuspecting Quayle, but at the last minute, Bill Pascal, Bush's liaison to the Beltway conservatives, leaked the plot, and Weyrich snapped. Suddenly there was a volcano of screaming, recalls one lobbyist in the room. Weyrich was calling Bill a traitor. He was spitting and frothing at the mouth, ready to get him a room right next to Hinckley. Okay. Interesting. When the yelling stopped, Weyrich dispatched a letter to Pascoe's fiancée, questioning Pascoe's loyalty, implying that it was unfit for marriage. There are explanations for what Weyrich did next. Some say it was exact revenge against Bush's administration for snubbing him. Others say it was retribution against a pro-choice Republican legislator. But on January 31st, 1989, Weyrich simply did not want what any authoritarian must. He held his first show trial. Surrounded by hordes of media, the still little-known political mechanic strolled into the Senate Armed Services Committee room and denounced his one-time ally John Tower as morally unfit for the post of Secretary of Defense. Over the course of many years, Weyrich said as the cameras clicked, I've encountered the nominee in a condition of lack of sobriety, as well as with women to whom he had not married. Tower later tried to defend himself, but it was too late. The Bush administration Senator Richard C. Shelby of Alabama, the Washington Post poured gasoline all over him and set him up to the Senate. Paul Weyrich struck a match and continued to burn. Now, again, there's a little piece that's left over here. A little bit over here. A little piece that's left over here. Who replaced John Tower? Okay? Was it a certain man named Richard Cheney? What was it? Was it a certain man named Richard Cheney? It was. So Weyrich, and because Council for National Policy, they didn't want Tower. They wanted Cheney. So they put the man literally without a heart, one of the most evilest men on the planet, next to George H.W. Bush. And he was Secretary of Defense from 1989 to 1993 during the First Gulf War. Okay. Good job there, CNP. Good job, conservatism. I'm not saying Tower would have been any better, but he's sure as shit no Dick Cheney. Today, Weyrich isn't the only Republican striking a match. Now, the outsiderism is no longer synonymous with republicanism. Conservatives react to any hint of bipartisanship or even productive leadership as an act of heresy. It's like the Inquisition up here, said one Senate leadership aide. Days with the Weld nomination was squelched. No one feels safe. In his 1962 essay, Pseudo-Conservatism Revisited, a postscript, Richard Hofstadter observed that the radical right was uncomfortable with the thought of any leadership that falls short of perfect. At the time, the essay offended many conservatives. Yet by the 1980s, several were parodying it themselves. The problem with conservatives is that you get 99% right with them, Bush's campaigner manager Lee Atwater reportedly griped. But you're 1% wrong, they want to eat their own. Since taking power in 1994, conservatives have gorged even by their standards. They have savaged Dole, ravaged Gingrich, plumped up the devoured lot. They have shut down the government they spent decades trying to fulfill. They have in short acted as nutty as Weyrich. A bunch of our people are kind of crazy, Dave K. Rohr, a longtime conservative activist and lobbyist, told National Journal. Even Gingrich, who knows something about mania, has begun to distinguish himself between his conservative critics and quote-unquote normal people. The irony, of course, is that conservatives' obsession with perfection and purity has transformed them into a species that always derided on the left, utopians. There is everything or there is nothing, and thus there is often nothing. Dissension is not the problem. Dissenters can often rejuvenate a moribund movement, cajoling and carping and nudging the party to stay faithful to its principles. When a movement cannot sustain its Weyrichism, that kind of rhetoric that brands one's own people apostates, when they make some of the compromises that power inevitably demands. Always being disgusted with the people you agree with can be self-destructive, says David Brooks of the Weekly Standard, but most of all, it's bad for your own soul. 24 hours after the Republicans and Clintons hammered out a balanced budget deal, 70 right-wing activists, everyone from Cato Institute to Family Research Council, packed into one of Weyrich's luncheons. Weyrich sat at the head table sipping his Pellegrino and wielding his gavel. How many people in the room support the budget deal, he asked. None raised their hands. How many support the tax deal? Only a few hands went up. Then from the back of the room, one lobbyist began to shout at Idaho Senator Larry Craig. Larry Craig. Remember Larry Craig? Was Larry Craig bathroom stall scandal, if I remember? You know, going into a bathroom stall and putting your leg underneath. Yes, it was. Yes, it was him. Okay. And that claims were made by one man named Mike Jones. There's 4 men who made claims to the Idaho State's newspaper, December 2007. And Mike Jones also said that he allegedly had sex and used methamphetamines with the Council for National Policy member and megachurch pastor in quotation marks, Ted Haggard. So yes, Larry Craig was under the bathroom stalls. A hardline Republican had always been considered an unwavering ally. That was your chance to go out and fight, the lobbyists yelled, and you caved. Startled at first, Craig stammered, "If you believe all these things can happen at one time, then you should leave town right now." The room filled with angry groans. "You didn't fight for this. I was the one in the negotiating room. You got 0. And so it goes the days in the Capitol. The triumph of Weyrichism has become the triumph of nothingism. Weyrich's a naysayer, a complainer, and a grumbler," says Congressman Ray LaHood, a Republican for Illinois. "If we tried to govern, nothing would happen." At the first ever International Conservative Conference last month, Republicans wallowed in what conservative columnist and former psychiatrist Charles Krauthammer called postpartum depression. The sessions included Why Conservatism is Failing, Need Conservatism Crack Up, and the Diagnosis of Defeat. Equally despairing, Christian right activist Martin Mayer recently called for the formation of a third party, and Michael Reagan, a popular conservative talk show host, announced he was defecting from the GOP fold to become an independent. "The Republican Revolution my father began," he declared, "is by all appearances dead." There's only one problem with all this gloom, it is, the Gipper might say, morning in America. The economy is roaring, the communist threat is safely receded, and evidence of the conservative revolution is so ubiquitous it is commonplace. A GOP Congress, an antebellum Supreme Court, a Democratic president who declares 30 years later after the Great Society the end of big government. Weyrich never need to be lonely again. There is not just the CNP and its secret gatherers. There's a weekly standard in the Washington Times, the Mooney CNP Washington Times. There is a George Will and a Robert Novak. There is a permanent Buchanan presidential campaign and his peasants with pitchforks. There is Empower America and the Heritage Foundation. And there is, of course, Weyrich's own potpourri of an anti-establishments, from the Free Congress Foundation to the Coalitions for America. The fact is, the conservatives have seized the majority, shifted the direction of the country, and redefined the agenda, says Dan Mayer, Gingrich's former chief of staff and now GOP lobbyist. "We are winning. Unfortunately, too many of my friends are determined to claim defeat out of the jaws of victory." Perhaps there's no better testimony of Weyrich's success than the failure of his latest counter-establishment, National Empowerment Television. Launched in 1993 with a budget of roughly $10 million, it was supposed to be Weyrich's masterwork, the first ideological-driven public affairs network in America. A kind of third-wave Pravda, for Weyrich was an attempt to dominate the movement again and cast out those who betrayed him. His strategy was to retaliate against Beltway Republicans by reaching out to Republicans in the hinterlands. "My view is Maoist," he says. "I believe you can control the countryside, and then the capital will eventually fall." But from the onset, it was a network of a verge of collapse. Its 24-hour-a-day programming was, if anything, less scintillating than C-SPAN's. One program, Next Revolution, explored America's abandonment of its traditional Judeo-Christian culture for the cultural Marxism of political correctness. It's Christian culture, but fine. Another American on Track demonstrated the unbound experience of train travel. The result was broadcasting was much sizzle as they say official television in the Serb Republic. So few cable systems carried national empowerment televisions that it reached barely 10% of all households. It probably empowered even fewer. In a 1993 op-ed in Washington Times, Weyrich, still hopeful, warned politicians who failed to recognize the significance of NET, National Empowerment Television, would certainly do so at their own peril. But inside the Beltway, only a few ever saw it, and less even feared it. "I didn't even know what the hell NET is," says longtime legislative aide Todd Preston. NET General Manager Brian Jones and Chief Operating Officer Burton Pine struggled to diversify programming with shows like Youngblood, a Gen X version of the McLaughlin Group. But Weyrich enforced his own suffocating form of political correctness. One reporter said he was nearly fired for getting a response from the Clinton administration about a scandal, he recalls. How? When a guest blurted out on air that he was gay, Weyrich became apologetic. "Why should I be ashamed?" Weyrich says. "I want people on a mission." Yet Weyrich even imposed ideological litmus tests on stagehands and secretaries. The result, staffers said, was sound technicians who could spout the pro-life line but not plug in the microphone. I had a different view of the importance of the battle of ideas, says Pines, who had previously worked at the Heritage Foundation. I have so much confidence in the power of Reaganite ideas that I've never been afraid to have anyone challenge them. Inside that building were scared pessimists. Where Weyrich had once pursued heretics inside the movement, he now hunted them down inside the building. In 1995, Pines, who had helped him launch the network and had known Weyrich for nearly 2 decades, was abruptly fired. A few months later, Jones resigned. In the subsequent months, the network would become increasingly Weyrich-centric. His cherubic visage was nearly unavoidable. In addition to his nightly show, the chat show The Direct Line, he hosted Independent Voice, Ways and Means, and American Investigator. Often he filled in for other anchors. His brow showing beads of sweat, he sometimes asked viewers to pray for him. Other times he allowed callers to praise him lavishly and at length. It was a cult of personality, recalls one former employee. Night after night, he railed against Republicans, from Colin Powell to Newt Gingrich to Bob Dole's pro-choice chief of staff. In defense of his own invective, Weyrich resorted characteristically to religious parable. I am struck by the fact that we have lots of people who want to be nicer than God, he says. If you read the scripture, Jesus was not some sort of milquetoast person with supreme charity. He cut people in two. Divine retribution, he is right about that. As they became back home in Wisconsin, people in Washington soon crossed the other side of the street when they saw Weyrich coming. Gingrich, who also anchored 2 shows, declined to sign another contract. Lott revoked the special Senate parking privileges Weyrich had gotten after a car accident. GOP Senator and CNP member John McCain of Arizona refused even to talk to him. We know, says Senator Orrin Hatch, CNP member, who also had the psychological problems. More and more isolated, Weyrich now surrounds himself with a coterie of sycophants, who aides say have little understanding of television, who patrol the corridors maintaining ideological discipline. His inner circle consists mainly of family members who receive handsome salaries for their services. One son is in charge of coalition luncheons. Another produces Morning View on Net. His daughter is vice president for development. Weyrich also relies increasingly on Bill Lind, a kind of minister of culture who hosts his next revolution each week, always wearing what appears to be the same black turtleneck. Lind's own McCainian ideology has only encouraged Weyrich. In a futuristic fantasy that echoes the Turner Diaries, and that was reprinted in Washington Post, Lind depicts a religious war against Washington elites where women who pursue a career are giving a bright red emboldened C to wear over their left breast, and where the unfaithful are gleefully burned at the stake. I remember the crowd that gathered for the execution, he writes, solemn but not sad, relieved at last after so many years of humiliation. The majority had taken back the culture. But the late 1996 net string of neat Victorian brownstones concealed what most people in Washington already suspected, the networking of the brink of financial ruin. Weyrich confesses he had to, quote-unquote, rape funds from the Free Congress Foundation to stay afloat. According to tax documents, he transferred over $2 million worth of assets in 1995 alone. Despite an unprecedented $20 million in conservative investments in the network's transformation from a nonprofit to a private company this March, Net is still losing money. Weyrich, it seems, has subverted himself with the profusion of so many conservative voices. There's little demand for Net, even beyond the Beltway. If people want to hear conservatives, they could turn on ABC or even the old liberal scourge PBS. I just don't know if there's any need anymore for national empowerment television, says Brett Hume, a former columnist for the National Review, who is now chief Washington correspondent for the newly created Fox News channel. Is anybody listening? And so Weyrich must now shout louder just to be heard. On one recent evening with the Republican Congressman Joe Barton left a Net broadcast early in order to cast a vote. Weyrich lost it. He blast-faxed his remarks to the media under the headline, Congressman walks out on a Net live interview. You wonder why they break their word on these big things, he fumed. They can even keep their words on little things. The last time I sat down to interview Weyrich is at the Monocle, where lobbyists and legislators congregate for lunch. It seems odd to see Weyrich, the spiritual outsider, nibbling on salmon at the same plate where JFK sent a limo from the White House to pick up his favorite sandwich. The problem with Gingrich, he says, is he does not have any immutable principles that he would die for. He doesn't seem to notice, scrawled on the ceiling above him, Sam Rayburn's famous saying, I live by my principles, and one of my principles is flexibility. Lott, he continues, is the greatest disappointment of my life. I really thought at heart that he was a patriot. I was wrong. As he denounces his former friends, he tucks a napkin into his collar so that it fans over his belly like a veil. He seems conscious of being mistaken for the people around him. He sits with his arms folded and crosses himself before breaking his bread. When I ask him what to order, he says he doesn't eat here enough to know. Yet judging by the staff's reaction to him, he seems to be a regular, a fact the manager later confirms. We chat pleasantly enough, and I wait to ask the last question I've scribbled in my notebook. Finally, as the waiter brings our check, I ask Weyrich if he's not become a kind of K Street Robespierre, a man who's devoted his life to building a movement and now profits by destroying it. He stares at me unblinkingly, and for the first time I glimpse his famous temper. I defy anyone to tell me any privilege that I have as a result of what I'm doing, Weyrich says, turning red. I just think that is a bogus charge. Though he makes at least $280,000 a year for all his operation as he's driven to the restaurant in a chauffeured sedan, I don't say anything. If the good Lord wants me to do something else, then I'll be gone tomorrow, he continues, his voice raising. Every year I've been in this city, I find it more sinful, and I've prayed many times for the opportunity to do something else. And so far the answer keeps coming back. Keep doing what you're doing. That's an interesting article. Alright, everybody. That is it for today's stream. We're going to have some streams later in the weeks, more covering the CNP, more covering the finders. Until next time, as always, read the documents. Take care, everybody. God bless you.